Have you ever watched a movie you've seen, I don't know, 100 times, but then you listen to the director's commentary?
Oh, yeah. That completely changes everything.
Right, because suddenly you realize you've been missing like half of what's actually happening on the screen.
Yeah, you're watching the exact same actors, the same plot.
Exactly. But the director points out the lighting choices or, the camera angles or the subtle swelling of the background score, and you realize the entire scene was engineered to manipulate your attention in a very specific way.
I mean, you thought you knew the story.
Right. But you were completely blind to the hidden architecture holding it up.
It changes the entire experience. Finding that secret language underneath the surface level of a narrative, well, it's a one-way street.
Oh, for sure.
Once you see those structural, mechanical cues, you can never unsee them. You stop passively looking at the story and start, looking through it, seeing the gears turning.
And that is the exact mission of this deep dive today. We are taking a text that is almost universally known. We're looking at the story of Jesus cleansing the temple in the Gospel of John, chapter 2.
The famous one.
Yeah, overturning the tables, driving out the money changers. But, and here's the twist, we aren't just going to read the story and recount the plot.
No, we're definitely not doing that.
We are going to look at this passage through the lens of advanced linguistic tools. We're diving into things like Greek verbal aspect theory
Which is fascinating.
and discourse analysis. Basically, we want to see how the author constructed this narrative at a microscopic level.
Right. How the actual grammar, the syntax, the placement of the verbs, how all of that fundamentally deepens our understanding of what is actually happening.
Because, geeking out on Greek grammar actually changes the way we see the whole story. Okay,
Good.
let's unpack this because, well, to do this, we have to look at the original Greek text.
We do. We are going to examine the exact grammatical machinery the author deployed to make this scene feel so violent and so disruptive and ultimately so theologically explosive.
But before we get to the flying tables and the whip of chords, I was looking through the notes on the source text, specifically the textual criticism part.
Ah, yes. The foundation.
Right, because when you're trying to analyze a text at the level of individual verbs and word order, you have to be absolutely sure that the text you're reading is actually what the author wrote. Right.
Exactly. Not just some medieval typo.
Right. And apparently the Greek text for this specific story is incredibly stable.
Remarkably so. I mean, when scholars look at the manuscript tradition for this passage, going back to the earliest papyri we have from the 2nd and 3rd centuries.
Which is crazy old.
Very old. And when they compare them with the massive, complete parchment Bibles to the 4th century, there are almost no significant variations.
See, it's always fascinating to me how textual criticism actually works in practice because, you think about documents being copied by hand for over 1,000 years.
Right.
And you just assume it must be like a giant game of telephone where the end result is totally unrecognizable.
That's a very common assumption.
Oh.
But the scholars who reconstruct these texts, they have this entire highly technical methodology for figuring out the original reading.
And one of the concepts in the notes is, let me see if I say this right, lectio difficilior.
Yes, lectio difficilior. It basically means the more difficult reading is usually the original one.
Which sounds backward.
It does sound backward at first, but you have to remember, scribes were human.
Right.
And their most common instinct, when they came across a sentence in an ancient manuscript that seemed, say, a little clunky or grammatically awkward or even theologically challenging, their instinct was to smooth it out.
They wanted to help the reader.
Exactly. They would try to fix it. They might add a clarifying word or rearrange a sentence so it sounded better to their contemporary ear.
Okay, so if you have two ancient manuscripts, and one has a perfectly smooth, easy-to-read sentence, and the other has this rugged, slightly awkward sentence that makes you stop and think.
The awkward one is actually more likely to be the original.
Because a scribe is much more likely to smooth out a rough text than to take a perfectly smooth text and inject weird grammar into it.
That is the core mechanism of lectio difficilior. And when you apply that principle, along with, tracing the geographical spread of the manuscripts, the base text for John chapter 2 is rock solid.
That's amazing.
I mean, maybe a scribe somewhere swapped an article or slightly shifted the word order of the animals, but there are no major additions or omissions that change the syntax or the meaning.
So we have a highly reliable blueprint of the original author's grammatical choices.
We know exactly where almost every Greek verb and every noun was placed. We aren't guessing.
Which means we can take this linguistic X-ray machine and really trust what we are seeing. So let's set the stage. The text gives us a very deliberate temporal and spatial framing before any of the action even starts.
It does. We get a clear geographical shift.
Yeah, from Capernaum up to Jerusalem.
Mm.
And the temporal marker is super simple. The Passover of the Jews was at hand.
Right. And it's important to note that John places this event very early in the narrative. We're in the beginning of what scholars call the Cana to Cana cycle.
Okay.
Jesus has just turned water into wine at a wedding in Cana. He goes down to Capernaum for a few days, and then he heads up to Jerusalem for one of the major pilgrimage festivals.
And because it's Passover, we know the city is just bursting at the seams. I mean, Jerusalem's population would swell by tens of thousands of pilgrims arriving from all over the Mediterranean diaspora.
It's a massive logistical event.
And that sheer volume of people brings up a really crucial lexical distinction that the sources highlight. When Jesus enters the temple complex, the text uses a very specific Greek word, hieron.
Hieron. It's a vital distinction.
Why is that so important?
Because Greek has multiple words that get translated into English simply as temple.
Ah, okay.
If a reader misses the shift between these words later in the story, they will miss the entire axis of the conflict. But in this opening scene, the author deliberately uses hieron.
Which means what, exactly?
It refers specifically to the massive outer temple precincts, the sprawling, open-air courtyards surrounding the sanctuary itself.
Okay, so this is the spatial frame for the discovery. He walks into the hieron, and the text says he found people selling oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers sitting there.
Right.
Now, you and I, we all know the story, so we tend to picture this as just, I don't know, a few greedy guys with card tables.
Like a small flea market.
Yeah. But given the logistics of Passover, this was a massive, highly organized commercial enterprise, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Think about the supply chain required for a festival of that magnitude.
I can't even imagine.
Pilgrims traveling from Alexandria or Rome or Antioch. They couldn't exactly drag an unblemished ox or a flock of perfect sheep across the Mediterranean Sea.
No, that would be a nightmare.
Or even hundreds of miles overland. They had to purchase their sacrificial animals on site in Jerusalem.
And then there's the currency issue. Because every adult Jewish male had to pay the annual half-shekel temple tax.
Yes, the temple tax.
But you couldn't pay it with just the money you had in your pocket, right?
No, you couldn't use standard Roman or Greek coinage to pay the temple tax.
Why not?
Because those coins bore the graven images of emperors and pagan gods. Bringing an image of Caesar, who often claimed divine status, into the temple treasury, that was a blatant violation of the second commandment.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no graven images.
Exactly. The tax had to be paid in Tyrian shekels, which had a high silver purity and lacked those specific offensive images.
So the money changers provided an absolutely necessary, mandated exchange service.
They did. You handed over your Roman denarii, they took a small commission, and you got the Tyrian shekels you needed to fulfill your religious duty.
Okay, so wait. This market isn't a black market operation at all. It's fully sanctioned. It's basically necessary for the mechanics of the religion to even function.
It was entirely necessary.
But let me make sure I'm visualizing the geography of this correctly. Because sometimes we hear cleansing the temple and we imagine Jesus bursting into the quiet, holy interior where the priests are praying.
A common misconception.
But he's out in this massive hieron. It's like, okay, imagine if you went to a sacred, silent, centuries-old cathedral. But out in the massive stone plaza right before the main doors, someone has set up a noisy, chaotic stock exchange.
That is a brilliant way to picture it.
Right. You've got livestock bleeding and defecating everywhere. You've got currency traders shouting exchange rates. You've got thousands of people haggling over the price of a dove.
The cathedral plaza analogy is perfect because it captures the tension of the space. While this commerce was practically necessary, it was happening within the boundaries of sacred space.
Even outside the main doors.
Yes. In the ancient Mediterranean world, space was heavily governed by models of purity and impurity. The hieron, even though it was the outermost court, was still a zone of holiness.
Interesting.
It was supposed to maintain a ritual boundary, separating the mundane, everyday world from the dwelling place of God.
It's like a buffer zone.
Exactly.
But the commerce, the sheer noise, the animal waste, the haggling, it's bleeding the profane directly into the sacred. The buffer zone has completely collapsed.
The sacred space is experiencing profound profanation. The market has effectively swallowed the space that was actually meant for Gentile prayer and preparation.
Oh, wow.
So the author has built the scene meticulously. We have a tense, incredibly crowded, noisy, deeply commercialized outer courtyard during the highest stakes religious festival of the year.
We have the temporal setting, we have the spatial setting, and we have the participants. The background is fully established.
Fully established.
And once that background is set, the action just explodes. And this is where the discourse analysis really comes alive.
It's a dramatic shift.
The linguistic breakdown calls this the action peak of the narrative. To understand how the author captures the sudden violence of Jesus' intervention, we have to look at verbal aspect.
Which is where the grammar gets really exciting.
Right. We have to look at how the Greek language handles verbs, which is apparently very different from how English handles them.
It is fundamentally different. English, you see, is obsessed with tense.
Right, like past, present, future.
Exactly. When we look at a verb in English, our first question is temporal. When did this happen? But Greek is primarily driven by aspect.
Okay, so what is aspect if it's not time?
Aspect isn't about when an action happens. It's about how the author is choosing to portray the action to the reader.
The sources mention Constantine Campbell's two-aspect model. They use this idea that aspect is like a camera lens.
Yes, the camera lens metaphor is incredibly helpful here. Campbell's model focuses on the distinction between the imperfective aspect and the perfective aspect.
Okay, let's break those down.
The imperfective aspect views an action from the inside as an ongoing, unfolding process. It doesn't give you the beginning or the end. It just drops you right into the middle of the action.
So it's continuous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In a narrative, the author uses imperfective verbs to paint the background scenery.
Okay, let's unpack this with the text. So when the text says the Passover was at hand, or that Jesus found the money changers sitting there, those are imperfective verbs.
Yes. The verb for was is imperfective. The word for sitting, which is kathomenos in Greek, is a present participle, which carries imperfective aspect.
Got it.
These verbs create a continuous background state. The commerce isn't an event that just started happening. It's a persistent, humming reality. The merchants are just sitting there. The business is ongoing.
So going back to the camera analogy, the imperfective verbs are like a slow, panning, continuous camera shot of the crowded courtyard.
That's right.
You see the sheep milling around in the background. You hear the low, continuous hum of the money changers tossing coins on the tables. The haggling is just a constant drone.
It sets a mood.
It's a wide establishing shot that makes the reader feel the ongoing, static nature of the marketplace.
The author basically lulls the reader into that static, ongoing environment.
Right.
But then, and this is crucial, we hit the discourse peak in verses 15b through 15-pins.
This is where it kicks off.
The author suddenly drops the imperfective aspect entirely. He abandons the slow panning camera and fires off a rapid sequence of perfective verbs, specifically using the aorist tense form.
And perfective aspect is the opposite of the ongoing background, right?
It is. Perfective aspect views an action from the outside as a whole completed event.
Okay.
It doesn't focus on the process at all. It focuses on the totality of the action. In narrative discourse, the aorist, the perfective aspect, is the engine of the main line.
The main line.
Yes, is the grammatical gear that propels the story forward.
So if the imperfective is the slow, continuous pan, the aorist verbs hit the reader like rapid-fire action cuts in an editing room. Bam, bam, bam.
Exactly. Look at the specific verbs the author strings together in this sequence. He drove out. In Greek, exebelin.
Drove out.
He poured out. Exegene.
Poured out.
He overturned anatripsin. Drove out, poured out, overturned.
Wow.
There are no ongoing processes here. There is no slow, deliberate buildup or conversation. The aspectual shift from imperfective to perfective mathematically proves that this is the foregrounded action.
So the persistent background hum of commerce is just violently shattered by these rapid, completed, authoritative strikes.
Precisely.
It changes the way you read it. When you realize the grammar itself is shifting gears, you feel the suddenness of the violence.
It's very visceral.
But there is another layer to this that I found absolutely fascinating in the textual analysis. It's not just the aspect of the verbs, it's the actual order the author places the words in the sentence.
Ah, yes.
The analysis talks about the textual metafunction and marked constituent orders. What does that mean?
So, in systemic functional linguistics, which provides the framework for this analysis, we pay close attention to syntax, meaning the order of words. In a standard unmarked narrative clause in Koine Greek, you generally expect the verb to come early. A typical structure might be verb, subject, object. The action leads the way.
Okay, that makes sense.
But Greek is highly inflected,
Meaning what?
meaning The endings of the words tell you what role they play in the sentence. This allows authors to move words around for emphasis without losing the grammatical meaning.
Okay, so you can scramble the word order and it still makes sense grammatically, but the feel of the sentence changes.
Precisely. When an author takes a word that normally goes at the end of a sentence and moves it to the very front, the theme position we call it, that is a marked constituent order.
It's marked because it's unusual.
Yes. The author is fronting that element to give it maximum prominence. It is what the author wants to hit the reader's mind first.
Okay, let's unpack this. In this rapid-fire aorist action sequence we just talked about, the author doesn't start these clauses with the verbs, right? He fronts the objects.
He aggressively fronts the objects. If we were to translate the Greek word order literally, preserving that fronting, it reads closer to this. All of them he drove out of the temple, both the sheep and the oxen.
All of them.
And of the money changers, the coins he poured out.
The coins.
And finally, and the tables he overturned.
Just imagine the phenomenology of reading that in the first century. You are sitting in a room hearing this text read aloud.
Right.
The very structure of the sentence pushes the chaotic physical objects right into your face before the action verb even lands. All of them. The coins. The tables.
It creates an immediate impact.
You are getting hit with the flying debris of the temple cleansing before your brain even processes the verb of what Jesus is actually doing to them.
The word order and the verbal aspect are working in perfect tandem here to create a scene of maximum sensory disruption. The fronted objects simulate the physical chaos, the flying coins, the crashing wood of the tables, while the perfective aorists deliver sudden, decisive completion. And the ideational analysis points out the nature of these verbs. They are material processes.
Right. They aren't abstract thoughts or verbal arguments. He's not standing in the corner giving a lecture on temple purity.
No, not at all.
It is intensely physical, tangible action altering the physical environment. He is physically dismantling the market.
He even takes the time to fashion a whip of cords, which the text notes as another perfective preparatory action. The physical disruption is sudden, total, and violent.
But here's the thing. You can't just walk into the most highly populated, highly guarded, sacred space in the ancient world, physically destroy the sanctioned economy, and then just dust off your hands and walk away.
That would be impossible.
Right. Physical action in a public space demands a social response. A car chase inevitably ends in a confrontation. There has to be a reaction from the authorities.
And the grammar reflects that inevitable collision. Up until verse 16, the discourse type has been purely narrative. It's an action sequence. But once the physical destruction happens, the discourse abruptly shifts into a dialogic subtype. The flying tables stop, and the verbal confrontation begins.
Jesus actually initiates the dialogue, right? He turns to the guy selling the doves.
He does, and the interpersonal metafunction analysis illuminates exactly what is happening in this exchange.
Okay, unpack that term, interpersonal metafunction.
This metafunction looks at how language constructs relationships. It asks, how are the participants relating to each other in terms of power, status, and authority?
Ah, okay.
Jesus does not offer a gentle suggestion here. He doesn't make a polite, mitigated request.
He's not saying, excuse me, could you move?
Definitely not. He uses second-person plural imperatives. Direct, unmitigated commands, take these things away. The Greek is arete.
Okay.
And then he follows it with a negative prohibitive command. Do not make my father's house a house of trade.
My father's house. That is an absolutely massive claim of personal ownership.
It is staggering.
He isn't just saying you guys are breaking the Torah. He is claiming a unique familial authority over the temple itself.
The grammar encodes a radically asymmetrical power dynamic. He is issuing commands to sanction merchants in the temple as if he is the master of the house.
Because he's acting like he owns the place.
He is claiming ultimate jurisdiction. And this is exactly what triggers the response from the Jewish authorities in verse 18.
Now, this part always baffled me.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it. He just trashed the courtyard. He disrupted the national economy during the biggest festival of the year. Why don't they just call the temple guard and arrest him?
That's a very logical question.
Right. They had armed guards for exactly this kind of disturbance, but instead of arresting him, they walk up and ask him a theological question. What sign do you show us for doing these things?
It seems like a very mild reaction to a riot.
Exactly. Why just ask for a sign when a guy is standing there with a whip amidst a pile of flipped tables?
To understand their reaction, we have to rely on the social scientific criticism models. Ancient Mediterranean society, and first-century Judaism in particular, operated on a strict honor-shame dynamic.
Honor and shame.
Yes. Your value in society wasn't just about how you felt about yourself internally. It was about your public reputation, your recognized status.
Okay.
The public interactions were constant, high-stakes negotiations of personal and group honor. What we are witnessing here is a formal challenge-riposte exchange.
Let's break down this challenge-riposte dynamic because it feels pretty foreign to how we handle conflict today, at least outside of maybe a political debate stage.
Well, by physically clearing the courtyard and declaring it my Father's house, Jesus has made a massive, highly public honor claim.
Right.
He has asserted supreme authority over the space. In doing so, he has directly challenged the honor and the status quo of the temple authorities who govern that space.
He's effectively saying, you are failing to run this house correctly, so I am taking over.
Exactly. And in an honor-shame culture, a public challenge like that cannot be ignored.
Why not just arrest him, though?
Because if the authorities simply arrest him with brute force, without socially discrediting him first, the crowd might view Jesus as a martyr and a prophet.
Oh.
And the authorities would lose face. They must challenge his claim publicly and force him to defend it. So they demand a sign.
A miracle.
A miraculous proof,
Yeah.
authorized by God, that validates his right to do these things. They were trying to force him into a corner.
It's a trap.
Exactly. Either produce a miracle right now to prove your divine status, or be exposed and shamed as a madman acting on his own rogue authority. Once challenged, Jesus is socially required to respond to maintain his honor.
But he doesn't give them a sign, not in the way they're demanding.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't call down fire from heaven to consume an altar. He doesn't heal leper right there in the higher end. He gives them a riddle, and his response is arguably the most famous part of this entire narrative.
His response is a masterclass in shifting the terms of the debate. If we look at the ideational metafunction of his reply in verse 19, we see exactly how he takes control of the interaction.
Okay, let's unpack the verbs here.
Jesus says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Look at the verbs he chooses. First, he issues another imperative command, almost daring them, destroy.
Lisats.
Yes. He isn't defending himself, he's challenging them back. And then, he uses a remarkably confident first-person singular future declarative verb, eju.
Eju, meaning
I will raise.
I will raise. The focus is entirely on his own agency.
Precisely. He does not say God will raise it. He says, I will raise it. He meets their demand for a sign by making an even more astonishing, incomprehensible claim about his own future material action.
Oh.
He completely flips the script, forcing his opponents out of their position of authority and into a defensive, utterly confused stance.
And you can see the confusion immediately because they think he's talking about the literal physical building they're standing in.
Which is a natural assumption.
Their objection in verse 20 is intensely practical. It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days? You have to picture the environment here.
The Herodian temple.
Yeah, they are standing in the middle of the Herodian temple complex. Herod the Great had initiated this massive expansion and renovation project decades earlier. They are surrounded by some of the largest cut ashlar stones in the ancient world, huge retaining walls, massive colonnades.
It was an architectural marvel.
It required an army of laborers and decades of work. And this guy from Galilee says he can rebuild it in a weekend. They think he has completely lost his mind.
That misunderstanding is the crux of the conflict. The Jewish authorities are stuck strictly on the literal material plane. They were thinking about historical construction.
The masonry?
Yes. The text actually uses the aorist passive verb oikodomithi was built over 46 years. They are looking at the masonry. But this brings us to the ultimate lexical trap the author has laid for the reader.
The trap we hinted at earlier.
Exactly.
The two different Greek words for temple. We talked about the hierin in the opening scene. The merchants, the sheep, the money changers, the chaos, all of that was happening in the hierin, the massive outer precincts.
But when Jesus speaks his riddle in this dialogue, he abandons the word hieron.
He does.
He suddenly switches to the word naos. He says, destroy this naos. And the authorities reply, it took 46 years to build this naos.
Okay, wait. What exactly is the difference between the hieron and the naos? Is John just using a synonym to avoid repeating the same word? Or is there a semantic shift?
It is a profound semantic shift. While hieron refers to the entire temple complex, including the outer courts and the plazas, naos refers specifically and exclusively to the inner sanctuary.
The inner sanctuary.
The sacred edifice itself, the holy place and the Holy of Holies. In the worldview of a first-century Jew, The naos was the cosmological center of the universe.
It's where God lived.
Yes, it was the literal geographic dwelling place of the presence of God on earth.
Ah, so when Jesus says destroy this naos, the authorities understand it completely literally. They think he is threatening to tear down the actual inner sanctuary building.
Which, by the way, would be a massive capital offense in the Roman world. Threatening the sanctity of a temple was sedition.
Right, but they are missing the metaphor entirely. And thankfully, the author steps in to help the reader out.
Yes, the discourse analysis tracks another vital shift right here. In verse 21, the discourse type shifts back from dialogic to narrative, but it takes the form of an authorial aside.
So the narrator jumps in.
The narrator pauses the historical timeline, steps out of the scene, and speaks directly to the reader. And he uses an imperfective verb to provide ongoing background clarification. But he was speaking about the temple of his body.
The temple of his body.
Akinos te elegen peritu nao tuso matosotu.
He was speaking about the naos of his body, the physical setting of the Hiron, the courtyard with the sheep and the coins and the tables, was merely a prop for a much larger lesson.
Exactly.
The actual theological center, the true naos, the true dwelling place of God, is standing right in front of them in the physical person of Jesus.
This is a prime example of textually signaled typology. It's crucial to understand that this isn't just a simple allegory where every detail represents some hidden spiritual truth.
Right, it's bigger than that.
Connecting this to the bigger picture, the author is explicitly signaling a typological fulfillment of history. In biblical theology, the Old Testament temple was a shadow. It served a vital purpose for a time as the geographic locus of God's presence and the place of sacrifice.
But the shadow isn't the final reality.
No. Jesus is declaring that the shadow has met its ultimate reality. The incarnate Son, the Word made flesh, is the true naos. His physical body is the ultimate location where God meets humanity.
And if we zoom out and look at the canonical context, the Gospel of John does this right out of the gate.
It does.
If you read Matthew, Mark, or Luke, they place the cleansing of the temple at the very end of Jesus' ministry.
During Holy Week.
Yeah, it happens right after the triumphal entry, and it acts as the immediate catalyst for his arrest and crucifixion. But John puts the story in chapter 2. He front-loads it. Why place such an explosive climax at the very beginning of the book?
Because canonically, this early placement sets the theological agenda for the entire Gospel of John. By placing this scene in the opening Cana to Cana cycle, John is establishing right up front that Jesus has arrived to replace the old systems of Judaism with himself. Wow. Think about it. In the previous chapter at Cana, the stone water jars meant for Jewish ritual purification were repurposed and replaced by the new wine of Jesus' ministry.
And then immediately after that,
the very geographic and spiritual center of Jewish worship, the temple itself, is declared obsolete, destined to be replaced by the resurrected body of Jesus.
destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up.
He isn't talking about masonry. He's
No.
predicting his own violent death and his physical resurrection.
Yeah.
The authorities asked for a sign to validate his authority, and he essentially tells them the ultimate sign will be the empty tomb.
The narrative structure perfectly preserves this theological tension of the already and the not yet.
Already and not yet. Yes. Jesus inaugurates the replacement of the old temple system in this moment. That is the already. He exercises authority over this space. But the full understanding of his riddle, the realization of the new naos, awaits his resurrection. That is the not yet.
It is brilliantly constructed. The grammar, the vocabulary, the syntax, the typological shifts, they all work in concert to support this massive theological reveal.
It's beautifully layered.
But the narrative doesn't just end with Jesus dropping this riddle and walking away. We have to look at the fallout.
The reaction.
Right. How do people actually react to this intense display of physical authority and this baffling claim? The text provides two completely different reactions from two different groups of people.
It does.
And the linguistic deep dive notes that these reactions are highlighted by a shift away from physical action toward mental verbs.
Yes, the ideational analysis shifts his focus drastically in the final verses of the passage. Earlier in the story, we saw a dominance of material processes, the physical actions of driving out, pouring, overturning, building.
The action sequence.
Exactly. But in verses 22 through 25, the processes become almost entirely mental. The verbs shift to cognition, perception, and belief. We move from physical conflict to internal reception.
Okay, let's look at the disciples first. How do they process what they just witnessed?
In verse 22, the grammar executes a massive flash forward. We get a temporal clause that moves us out of the present moment. when therefore he was raised from the dead.
So the author skips to the end.
The author brings us to a post-resurrection perspective.
Oh.
And from that future vantage point, the mainline aorist verb returns. Emnosthezan.
Emnosthezan.
His disciples remembered. They remembered the scripture from Psalm 69, zeal for your house will consume me. And they remembered the specific word Jesus had spoken about raising the nas.
And what's the result of that remembering?
As a direct result of that retrospective remembrance, the text uses another perfective aorist verb, epistiosan.
Meaning?
They believed. They believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken.
So the disciples don't really understand it in the moment. They're probably just as confused as the authorities.
Most likely, yes.
But they achieve full retrospective understanding. Once the resurrection actually happens, the puzzle pieces finally click into place. They remember the riddle, they see the empty tomb, and they believe. Their faith is grounded in the completed event.
Exactly.
But what about the crowd? Because there's a whole other group of people at this Passover feast witnessing all of this.
In verse 23, the author brings us back to the present historical setting of the feast in Jerusalem. It says, many believed in his name.
Okay.
And again, it uses the perfective aorist verb, epistuzon. But the text immediately qualifies the nature of their belief, using a present participle to explain their reasoning. Because they saw the signs he was doing.
They saw the miracles. The text doesn't tell us exactly what those miracles were in Jerusalem, but the crowd is obviously wowed by the spectacle.
They are very impressed.
They see the power, they see the authority, and they are fully on board. They believe.
But this leads to one of the most stunning and, frankly, chilling linguistic contrasts in the original Greek.
Oh, this part is wild.
It is a play on words that often gets smoothed over or entirely lost in English translations.
Okay, let's unpack this.
The crowd believed in Jesus. The verb is pistu. But verse 24 immediately follows that by saying, but Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them.
Okay.
And the Greek verb used there is the exact same root. He did not pistu himself to them.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following this. When I read it in English, it says they believed in him, but he didn't entrust himself to them. It sounds like two different concepts, but in Greek, it's the exact same word.
It is the exact same verb.
How can they pistu in him, but he refuses to pistu in them?
It is a deliberate, brilliant subversion of the word. They believed in him, but he did not believe in them. He did not entrust himself to their kind of belief.
Wow.
The discourse analysis looks at cohesion chains here, specifically focusing on the verbs of knowledge, to explain why Jesus rejects their belief. Why didn't Jesus entrust himself to a crowd that was cheering for him and amazed by his miracles?
Yeah, you'd think he'd want followers.
You would think so. But the text answers with a causal clause. Because he knew all people. The verb is ginisken. And then verse 25 drives the point home. And needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man.
He knew what was in man. That implies a deep psychological penetration.
It does. And we must look at the verbal aspect again here.
Back to aspect.
Yes. The verbs describing Jesus' knowledge, knew, eginisken, and his refusal to entrust himself, epistuin, are not aorists.
They aren't the perfective action verb.
Exactly. They're in the imperfect tense. They carry imperfective aspect. These are not sudden one-off realizations. They describe Jesus' superior, ongoing, continuous state of penetrating insight.
So it's a continuous state.
Yes. He is looking right through their superficial, signs-based enthusiasm. He sees the underlying, persistent reality of the human heart.
That is profound. The author is drawing a sharp, unmistakable line between two completely different paradigms of faith here.
He really is.
On the one hand, there is this superficial, signs-based belief. It's the kind of belief that is wowed by the miracles, that loves the spectacle, that probably cheered when the tables got flipped because it was a great show of sticking it to the corrupt authorities.
Entertaining to them.
But it's thin, it's external, it's entirely dependent on what Jesus can do for them in the moment. And Jesus looks at that kind of belief with his continuous penetrating knowledge and basically says, I don't trust that. I do not commit myself to spectacle seekers.
Because spectacle seekers will abandon you the moment the spectacle stops, or the moment the demands of the cross become apparent.
Right.
Jesus requires a deeper entrustment. Connecting this to the bigger picture, he is looking for the kind of belief demonstrated by the disciples back in verse 22.
The retrospective belief.
Yes, a belief that is grounded in the scripture, a belief that grapples with his identity as the true naos, the dwelling place of God, and a belief that rests on the ultimate reality of his resurrection, not just the thrill of a miraculous show in the courtyard.
And this brings the entire deep dive right back to you, the listener. Think about your own learning journey or your own intellectual or spiritual life.
It's very applicable.
It is so incredibly easy to become a tourist in the Hiron, to walk around the outer courts, marveling at the sights and sounds, getting caught up in the noise and the commerce, settling for a superficial thrill or a shallow understanding of a
It's
text.
very easy.
But true knowledge, true insight, it demands much more of us. It asks us to push past the spectacle, past the surface level reading, and grapple with the deeper reality, the naos at the center.
The text itself acts as a warning against superficiality. And the beauty of applying these advanced linguistic tools, looking at the verbal aspect, the syntax, the discourse shifts, is that it forces us to slow down.
You can't skim this.
No, you can't. It forces us to read the text with a fraction of the penetrating depth that Jesus used to read the crowds. By analyzing the mechanics of the grammar, we aren't just skimming the surface for plot points. We are peeling back the layers to see the architecture of meaning.
Yeah.
Critical thinking and rigorous reading are what transform basic information into true, lasting knowledge.
It completely reframes the way you approach a familiar text. Let's summarize the journey we've just taken because, man, we covered a massive amount of ground today.
We certainly did.
We started with a familiar Sunday school story about Jesus getting angry in a temple courtyard. But by putting on our linguistic X-ray glasses, we saw the hidden mechanics.
The gears turning.
Yeah, we saw how the author used the imperfective background verbs to paint a slow, panning picture of commercialized, profane, sacred space. We felt the perfective aorist verbs fire off like rapid-action camera cuts as Jesus violently and decisively cleared those courts.
And we saw the syntax throwing the tables and coins right into our faces.
Right. We tracked the crucial discourse shift from narrative action to a high-stakes, honor and shame dialogic confrontation, where Jesus used unmitigated imperatives to claim ultimate authority over his Father's house.
Forcing the authorities into a defensive posture.
We caught the lexical trap, the profound shift from the outer Hiron to the inner naos. This revealed the textually signaled typology that the massive stone temple was just a shadow, and that Jesus' own resurrected body is the ultimate true center of God's presence.
The ultimate reality.
And finally, we saw the stark ideational contrast between a crowd that offered a shallow, miracle-driven belief and a savior whose continuous, penetrating knowledge refused to trust superficial faith. I mean, a simple story of overturning tables is actually an incredibly dense, intricately constructed masterclass in theology, all encoded in the very fabric of the Greek grammar.
It is a remarkable piece of literature, and studying it this way demonstrates a fundamental truth. There is always more to learn. When we apply multiple perspectives, whether it's textual criticism, grammatical analysis, or social scientific context, it immensely enriches our understanding and guards us against flat, simplistic readings.
So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you go about your day. We've spent this time seeing how the physical temple, the ultimate center of religious and cultural life for centuries, the massive stone structure that took 46 years to build and was the pride of the nation, was ultimately just a shadow.
It's just a signpost.
Yeah, it was merely a signpost pointing toward a much greater ultimate reality in the person of Jesus. So turn that lens on your own life. What structures, what systems, what routines or institutions are you currently treating as your ultimate destination? Are you pouring your energy into maintaining a massive, impressive Hiron when it might really just be a signpost pointing you toward a deeper, truer reality you haven't fully explored yet?
That's a challenging question.
Are you missing the director's hidden cues in your own story? Keep looking deeper. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.